Hi, I'm Tyler, and this is the Fox Valley Film Critics. In this episode, we're going to be discussing the 13th in the lineup of the AFI's Top 100 movies, the original Star Wars, as well as Edgar Wright's newest film, Baby Driver. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to the show, brought to you by Groupthink Productions and FVTV. Joining us once again is our wonderful return guest, AJ.
I'm back. I'm starting to think that it's not that you like me more, it's just I'm the most available of all your friends. Just got nothing going on.
Yeah, it's not that you're my friend or that I respect you intellectually, it's that I can extort you more properly than the rest of them.
Exactly. So how you been?
Doing well, man, doing well. So, you specifically wanted to come on for the Star Wars episode because you said this is your favorite of the franchise then?
Well, yes, but that's not necessarily saying that much. I have seen all the Star Wars movies that have come out, and while the original is my favorite, I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily a fan of the series as a whole. It just doesn't connect with me. We've talked many times before that sci-fi in general doesn't really connect with me for whatever reason. The stories I can appreciate, but it's just all the excess kind of ambient noise and visuals that take me out of it.
And what is it about the original film that kind of gets you then?
I think it's the most self-contained and isolated movie that can stand apart from the series and really shine as a well-written, well-told, well-acted, very well-imagined movie without having to refer to any other movie in the series.
Yeah, I'd say self-contained is definitely true. I was giving it a lot of thought up and coming to this, just how I was going to approach discussing the original Star Wars film, because this must be the most over-talked film in the history of the medium, where so much intellectual thought and history of and art discussion has gone just into exploring this one film and its myriad of sequels, books, video games, reboots, subsequent secondary reboots, spin-offs. Yeah, it's the most lucrative entertainment franchise in the film industry, and everyone and their mother has seen it, and its fans have discussed the film so much that most everyone knows about it enough that they can have a solid opinion on it. So approaching this from a fresh direction was a little bit daunting, but I guess I think the smartest way to do it is just from the context of what this original film kind of meant in the context of its day and how it was constructed, because the history of the film's development is kind of a fascinating cluster of failures.
Sure.
No one believed in the film conceptually. George Lucas actually had a bet with Spielberg that his film would lose out to E.T. in the box office, and they both decided that they were going to invest in each other. So they got a 2% share in each other's films for whoever made more film. Guess who won that bet?
I wonder. Well, they were both very successful.
Oh, sure, but Star Wars just took off.
It blew everything out of the water. It was unprecedented, really. I mean, the only thing that preceded that kind of success was Jaws 2 years prior. And even that was just, no pun intended, blown out of the water.
Yeah.
And it found its fan base, and it exponentially grew as more people saw it. It just connected with audiences in that day and every generation since. I don't really know if there's any explaining why Star Wars became what it was. There's
definitely a zeitgeist factor to it, because the 70s was a decade of profound societal unrest, and I don't know if chaos is the right word, but there was a lot of cynicism and frustration with basically every level of reality, because this is two different decades separated out from the 50s. Government's good, family is nice, everything is peachy keen, and you had nonstop political assassinations, riots. Movies were just kind of reflecting this. So, like, there were all these disaster movies that were very much based on like on destruction and large-scale death, and there was a lot like big movie franchises like Dirty Harry. So this like
and
cynicism was kind of the note of the day. And while this is generally the decade that's respected the most by film critics as like one of the great decades, because this was when you got Godfather, Taxi Driver, Butch Cassidy, basically all of the great directors got like a chance to make their film in this decade. So it's usually held up as one of the great decades of film. And the Star Wars kind of caps off the decade slightly, like around like right before the 80s comes, and it kind of and Hollywood shifts more into the action buddy cops
blockbuster.
Yeah, the blockbuster.
It really was such a shift from the street level personal stories told by directors like Robert Altman, Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese, into this form of escapism, really, that took people out of their lives, which they, at the time in that decade, they were so used to seeing on screen, relatable characters. Instead, they got these relatable characters in these scenarios that were literally out of this world.
You got to think that's kind of necessary at this point, because you're at this point in the, as I said, you're in the 70s. You're in the rear end of the Vietnam War. Everyone is angry. Everyone is cynical, and the zeitgeist is obviously demanding a bit of optimism. They need to kind of get out of the rut. They need to kind of get out of this like everything is bad, everything is morally gray, and they needed to kind of have that like we need a clear enemy to fight. And then you start seeing movies like this, Superman the movie, Rocky, and it just kind of keeps going from there, where the enemy very much shifts to something a lot more clear. And in this case, the Star Wars is ultimately kind of an exploration of how you as a person like go about fighting bad things in the world in a moral sense. So it's Luke Skywalker's journey to becoming, what's the best way to put it? He needs to.
It's a hero's journey.
It's a hero's journey, obviously, but I think that there's more to it than just that, because the hero's journey aspect only really came about as the fact that George Lucas was very bad at narrative writing when he was writing the script. He was like a poem writer, so he used the hero's journey as essentially his template.
Not only that, but he looked to the films of Kurosawa in the 50s. There's so much samurai influence in Throne of Blood, Yojimbo,
Hidden Fortress.
There's
also we referenced The Searchers a couple weeks back, which there's clearly references to that in there.
Sure.
The reference pool from this film is insanely deep. Like you can pick a lot of different things out of this and say like that comes from that comes from that comes from that, and it's definitely pulling from a lot of influences. But I think with anything else, the core is ultimately what makes it work, and that core is, it's about someone fighting evil and not succumbing to evil in the process. And I think that's kind of that might tap into the zeitgeist more than anything else, because it's the idea that there's a clear evil out there that needs to be kind of fought. And and one of my observations over years of watching the film is just that the Empire and the Rebellion are kind of like indistinct, like not in the sense that they're not different, they're clearly different, but you never find out much about their ideologies or what they stand for. We just know freedom, tyranny, and obviously they're not the point of the film. Like even in the sequels, you see a strong emphasis on the war that's going on, but the war doesn't. It fades to the background immediately after the Battle of Hoth in the second movie, and it becomes the Empire specifically is trying to track down these four characters.
Yeah, it's interesting saying that you watch a movie called Star Wars, and what you get is more of a personal story about these, I guess, trio, or however many they have in their band at one time.
I said four for some reason.
It's really well, if you want to count Chewbacca, why not? Wookiees are humans too.
He doesn't get character until the seventh movie, but.
So yeah, it is a personal story told on a grand scale, and I think that is what makes it so appealing. It's relatable and still escapist.
Yeah, and I think that probably the big miracle of Star Wars is that, like, if you look back, it was such a deeply troubled production, and one of the things that you look back on is, like, if you listening to the development diaries and people talking about it, is that the film was really a conglomeration of the post-production side of things, like more than even the production, because the actors were laughing at George Lucas on set. George Lucas he wasn't just the writer and director, he was the producer, so he was in charge of getting everyone in place, in addition to keeping the script in place and directing the actors. And he was obviously in over his head. Like, George Lucas was talented at the time. He worked on The Godfather as one of the editors, and so he was very talented. But the film really didn't kind of gain its like identity status until you get to the post-production part where you have the most forgotten person in this Star Wars canon, which is George Lucas's wife, who was the editor of Taxi Driver, who did the editing. Then you had John Williams' music, and you had Ben Burtt's sound design, and it kind of pulled everything together in a way that made the film work in a way that it wouldn't have been able to had it just been George Lucas. And I think that's kind of the miracle, is it taps into all these different pieces of zeitgeist and need of the time, and it builds something that ended up being bigger than the sum of its parts. That's all the time we have for this segment. Join us shortly for our discussion of Edgar Wright's Baby Driver. Stay tuned.
Does this help at all?
Anything helps, ma'am. Just try to get some sleep now.
I can't sleep.
Yeah, me neither. I'm on my way.
Hello and welcome back to the show. Now we're going to talk about Edgar Wright's newest film, Baby Driver. So we just saw the film a couple nights ago. We've had a little bit of time to gestate on it a little bit. What are your thoughts on it now?
Well, first of all, Edgar Wright is back. Can we just celebrate that for a second?
Slow clap. Yes.
And I couldn't be happier. This newest movie he made is probably the least Edgar Wright movie he's made thus far.
Are you ripping off my article?
Maybe. I may have read that this morning for some inspiration. But no, I think that's obvious to anybody who's seen his filmography, that this is probably his most conventionally shot from a stylistic standpoint film to date. But still, it's an Edgar Wright movie, so you're gonna get entertainment. You're never gonna be bored.
Exactly. I think we should offer a little bit of a history lesson here. So I don't know how many people know who Edgar Wright is, because he's kind of a cult item, but
well, he's British.
Well, he's British, yes, but that kind of sells well nowadays.
Yeah.
But
well, both of the leads in this new movie were British, playing Americans, if I'm not mistaken.
That's so weird. It's like the fact that they keep hiring British dudes to play Spider-Man. Just like, what?
It works.
I guess, but so yeah, Edgar Wright. He started out as a filmmaker in England in the 1990s. He did an indie film called Fistful of Fingers, which I haven't seen yet, but I really want to.
It's very hard to find.
I think it's on YouTube, but he managed to get a hold of the BBC, and they let him do this really surprisingly good little television series called Spaced, which was like 2 seasons long, but which is common for British television. Mm. And
2 seasons of only like 6 episodes each.
Yeah, so which, as I said, common in British television, but it ended up being this kind of wonderful little cult hit, and it earned him enough credibility to get him the ability to do an indie film, which he did, which is the wonderful Shaun of the Dead, and
which does not feel like an indie film at all.
No, it has the kind of breadth and voice of like a full-fledged like working Hollywood director.
Yeah.
It's one of those films you see and it's just like, this guy is going to go far. And then he immediately does not a sequel, but a spiritual follow-up, Hot Fuzz, which is, well, Shaun of the Dead was a zombie parody. Hot Fuzz is a cop parody, and he's been continuing since that with different takes on different genres. He did an adaptation of Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, which I really like. Then he finished. Then he did the third film in that in the pseudo parody trilogy referred to as the Cornetto trilogy, and which is The World's End. And then he kind of dropped off the radar for the past few years because he tried to write and direct Ant-Man, and he left Marvel on very bad terms.
Yeah, I don't know the entire history, nor do I really need to. I enjoy the movies. You know, why do I need to find out about the behind-the-scenes stuff to kind of take away from it? But, you know, however much influence he ended up having on Ant-Man, I think Peyton Reed still did a good job of filling in those shoes.
He and Joe Cornish wrote the entire script. Like, the only thing that I don't know for sure what they cut, but I think what happened was they wanted to add the scenes with the Falcon in, so they could tie Ant-Man into Civil War and just kind of get more. It's like, hey, we have another Avenger, so we can make money off of this. And because no one wanted to do an Ant-Man movie prior to that, he just kind of was like, I want to do this, man. I want to do this. And I was like, okay, let this critically acclaimed director make his little Ant-Man movie. And then they came in and took the project over, and he got kicked to the streets, which meant for the past 4 years there hasn't been an Edgar Wright movie.
Yes, since The World's End was his last one,
2013.
And then Scott Pilgrim before then. He's had 3-year gaps between each of his movies, so 4 years isn't that much more, but it just feels like it because of all the drama that went on in between his 2 films.
Yeah, especially since now he's clearly trying to jump away from the Cornetto films and try to do something a little bit more different. Like, I have no idea where he wants to go with his career, but I get the sense that he really wants to kind of separate himself, like, stylistically from the Cornetto films and Scott Pilgrim vs. the World and do something a little bit more, not conventional per se, but at least stretch his wings a little bit and kind of figure out what else he can do.
Which is not to say that Baby Driver isn't stylish. My word, is it stylish.
Well, it's playing up the heist genre, which is one of the kind of quiet Hollywood staples that's been around for a long time. Do you know anything about Walter Hill's The Driver from the 70s?
I'm familiar with it only as an influence to movies these days.
It's clearly borrowing a lot from that style of heist film where you have this like hyper-skilled driver who's getting pursued, and he gets caught up in a situation where, like, similar films being Nicholas Winding Refn's Drive and then Jason Statham's Transporter, although the quality is significantly different. But
now who's ripping off your article?
Huh?
Now who's ripping off your article?
Hey, I wrote it! But yeah, it's that same style of movie where you have a driver, he's the best at what he does, and what he does is not very nice. And Logan's right there. But it's very much the same kind of recycled plot as those films. Best he is at what he does, and he gets caught in a situation that kind of goes out of control, and he has to make a decision about how to get out of it. And Baby Driver is very much kind of following that, but it's doing that style of movie from the perspective of an action comedy, which is a different take on this genre, because usually it's moody thriller or action schlock. And so this time we get all the joys of really well shot and well conceived car chase scenes, and we get really great, and we get a lot of Edgar Wright's kind of personal touches. So if every film generally has a theme, like Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is video game based, and then the Cornetto films are all like based off of genre films, this is very much a music film.
Oh, absolutely.
This is like every scene is kind of has a different song that kind of punctuate it, similar in style to the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, but here it's a little bit more subtle. Like they aren't making the music. The music doesn't necessarily stand out in the way it does in those films.
I would actually disagree with you in the best way, though. The thing that hooked me about this movie, even, well, obviously Edgar Wright directing it hooked me, but what got me beyond excited for it was that I heard that the action was choreographed to the music in the background. So, which the amount of work that it must take to pull that off is amazing to me, and it totally worked. I thought that was one of the high points of the movie, was how each action scene, each gunshot was a beat in the song. It was and the characters kind of dancing around the rhythms of the underlying tracks.
Sure, I mean subtle more in the sense that it's not themed music in the way Guardians is, because like everything in Guardians is like 70s pop, and here it's much broader and a little bit more less defined by a specific genre, because he clearly has a very deep sense of like musical knowledge.
Sure.
In terms of like what he knows. Like one of the more interesting scenes of the film, he walks around with a tape recorder. He records people's conversations, and then he'll take it home, and then he'll like sit down like late in the night, and he'll just kind of edit it into like.
He'll make a mixtape.
Yeah, he'll make mixtapes out of people's discussions, and he'll just kind of like come up with these like tiny little. I don't even know how to. It's really creative and cute. Like
It really is. And speaking of cute, I want to talk about the romance in the movie, which is the kind of the other half of the story. On one hand, you've got Ansel Elgort's character Baby involved with Kevin Spacey, who kind of organizes all of these heists and hires crews. And then on the other side, you have his romance with Lily Collins, which I found really adorable. And really, their relationship had me sold and carried me through the movie about as much as the action did.
The movie holds a lot of like that's kind of the emotional glue of the film, because a lot of the drama comes from just that aspect of the film, because there are scenes where you clearly, like, the film is clearly saying it's like she's going to be put in danger by his actions or the actions of other people, and that's kind of where it kind of like, more than anything else, that's where the heart rate rises a little bit. Like, I always like a lot with films from Edgar Wright and the Coen brothers, I always feel like I need to review them multiple times before I truly get what's going on in them.
They're very layered.
They're very layered. They're very difficult to kind of get on a first pass, and I think I definitely need to see it again, because the first hour of the film, it spends a lot of time just kind of following the characters, and there's not a lot of actual drama going on. And I think that I don't know if that's the film being very deliberate in what it's trying to set up, or if that's a knock against it specifically. Like I want to spend more time with it and kind of see how that kind of gels and how much I get used to it at the time. But like that first hour, I was very kind of worried that this was like not going in the right direction.
Well, I think I would prefer built characters that are set up into a dramatic climax than to have false drama kind of inserted throughout the movie to make you care about the characters, even though you really haven't had enough experience with them to feel for them yet.
But you're supposed to weave the drama in. I appreciate a film that can grab me from the first like 2 minutes of the film and keep me there, as opposed to a film that spends an hour building and then pays it off in the climax, because that's obviously it's kind of cheating. There's a lot of movies that do that, and it kind of makes it feel like it's not quite on point. But any final thoughts on the film?
Well, I'd just say that if you want to go to the theater for a good time and to just enjoy well-written, fun characters and an exciting plot, this is a movie for you.
Yeah, I'm picking on it a little bit, but it is great, and I want to see it again.
It really is.
That's all for this discussion. Join us shortly for AJ's movie recommendation for the week. Stay tuned.
Good coffee, huh? Oh my God! What are you doing in my apartment?
Hello and welcome back to our final segment. AJ, what do you recommend this week?
Well, I always like to tie in my recommendation to the movies we talked about today. And in this case, I'm going to be talking about George Lucas's American Graffiti.
Interesting choice.
1973, it is a quintessential coming-of-age teen summer transition film. You can see it as kind of the 70s version of Rebel Without a Cause. You can see it as a precursor to Fast Times in Ridgemont High, and kind of really the heyday of 80s, or of coming-of-age movies in the 80s. I think this really laid the groundwork for that. And on top of that, it's kind of, along with films like Baby Driver, the soundtrack really does carry you through the movie, and it almost becomes a character in and of itself. Have you seen it? Are you familiar with it?
I'm familiar with the history of the film. I have not actually sat down to watch it yet.
Okay. I was introduced to it at a young age, not having seen it, but my dad playing me the soundtrack or songs from the soundtrack and saying, "Oh, this reminds me of this movie American Graffiti. We need to watch it sometime." And it really wasn't until about a year ago that I sat down and watched it with my dad, which was really a special experience after hearing about it for a while. It stars Richard Dreyfuss and has a small role by Harrison Ford near the end, which is kind of how he got involved with George Lucas. And yeah, it's really relatable to teens who are in that period of they're done with or almost done with school, and they're just trying to figure out what they want to do with their life, whether college is an option, whether they want to pursue jobs, girls, just life in general. It really does speak to teens from any generation, and in that sense, it really is a perfect coming of age movie.
When you watch the Star Wars development documentaries, they mention a lot of George Lucas's early work. That film, THX, which I haven't seen yet, but I own a copy, but I haven't seen it yet. And I've always been meaning to, because it's one of those, like, this is the film that got him Star Wars. This is the film that got him credibility within the industry, that got him clout.
Because THX certainly didn't.
Well,
if anything, that could have lost him Star Wars with that
was it
kind
bad?
Of critical success. Oh, no.
Was it just kind of out there?
It was, yeah. It was George Lucas going crazy with his imagination before he kind of had people to rein him in and make more of a narrative flow.
Yeah, George Lucas is at his best when he has people reining him in, as the last 20 years of Star Wars sequels has proven. But like, even going back as far as Return to the Jedi, like, you can definitely see that kind of profit motive over story logic kind of problem taking over a little bit with the Ewoks and stuff like that.
Yeah, something that Edgar Wright occasionally gets accused of is style over substance. I think that's very unwarranted, but George Lucas, when he's not kind of more on track, does tend to do that, and I think he's never better narratively than American Graffiti. Yeah,
definitely. That's all the time we have for this week. You can follow me on Twitter at @AntisocialCritI. That's critic without the C at the end. You can find more articles about my film review, including my film reviews, at the antisocialcritic.tumblr.com. And you can find past recordings of the show on the Groupthink Productions YouTube page. I'm Tyler with the Fox Valley Film Critics. Have a good week.